We will continue on with our committee meetings this afternoon. Our next committee is Committee of the Whole, and we have 5 items before us. The first one is a confirmation of a mayor's appointment of Ms. Jordan Steffens as special counsel to the Bellingham Civil Service Commission. Mayor Seth Fleetwood has appointed Jordan Steffens as special counsel to the Bellingham Civil Services Commission, subject to confirmation by City Council. Ms. Stevens is an attorney with Anderson Hunter Law Firm of Everett. She chairs the firm's Municipal Division and Employment Practices Division. Ms. Stevens has significant experience advising on civil service matters. She has served as special counsel to the Everett Civil Service Commission for a number of years. Upon confirmation by City Council, Ms. Stevens will advise the Bellingham Civil Service on all matters, including regular business and appeals. This appointment is authorized by the recent council amendment to BMC 3.16.040 and City Charter 6.03. The legal department recommends Ms. Stevens with confidence. And here to take us through is City Attorney Alan Mariner.
Thank you. The reason for this appointment is to eliminate the appearance of fairness issues that occur when attorneys from the City Attorney's Office represent both the department head and the Civil Service Commission in appeal hearings. And there's a question asked as to whether this appointment is okay under the current BMC, because the amendments that we're making, you're doing a third and final on that ordinance this evening. And both the current BMC, that's 3.16040, and as amended, once you do third and final, allow for this appointment. So we're just seeking confirmation of Ms. Stevens by council today.
Thank you, City Attorney. I will now entertain a motion for approval.
Second.
Motion's been made by Councilmember Williams, seconded by Councilmember Anderson. Any comments? Seeing none, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Recusals? Motion carries 7-0.
Correction, because we're short one.
I'm sorry. I can't count today. A motion carries 6-0. The next item is an ordinance prohibiting the use of controlled substances in public places. Mayor Seth Fleetwood is proposing that it be unlawful to use controlled substances in public places. The proposed ordinance would amend and add a new section to Bellingham Municipal Code 10.08. Recent changes in state law have resulted in an increase in the use of controlled substances in public places and an increase in negative impacts and in some cases criminal behavior. With this change to the BMC, use of a controlled substance in public would be a misdemeanor and subject to arrest. And here to take us through is Mayor Seth Fleetwood.
Thank you, Councilmember Hamill. Good afternoon, Council. As you know, a number of initiatives were proposed by my office last week that include the proposed ordinance that Councilmember Hamill just addressed. I think in a perfect world, although we announced this by different means that was seen somewhat widely, I believe, we should have included an agenda bill relating to the idea that's being presented for creation of a therapeutic court, also known as a community court. But we're here to talk about that in addition today, because I know that there's interest in that topic. And some see it as related. I certainly do as well. Municipal Court Judge Deborah Lev is here to just give a high-level overview of the value of a therapeutic court in helping people who have, among other things, drug addiction issues. Chief Mertzig is also here to talk about some of the practical aspects of what would ensue if the ordinance prohibiting use of controlled substances in public is enacted. So this comes before us at a time for, I think, a confluence of reasons. I was at a national conference just 7 weeks ago or so at which the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, addressed our group, concentrated solely on the national fentanyl crisis. I'm trying to train myself to say fentanyl. and gave a broad overview of the federal response. At that conference, the mayor of Portland was present and talked about the crisis that's happening in that city relating to the increase in illegal use of drugs, including on public streets. Locally, in recent weeks, we've had an increase of concerns voiced by downtown merchants and community members about the state of things in our downtown, the increase in use, the discomfort that that's providing a lot of community members, and the fact that it's making them reluctant to use our downtown. We're trying to be responsive to that. And so toward that end, I've proposed consideration for council of this ordinance that's before you. I know that we've had booking restrictions in our jail. I think you're well familiar with the fact that this community is actively engaged in the process of putting a ballot before our community members to support the funding of a new jail, but that's still several years down the road, and there's going to be booking restrictions for some period of time. We're in the process of actively looking at contract jail space to assist as well. But the ordinance that we're commending to you is something that I think is going to be beneficial on a number of fronts. We're not suggesting this is a cure-all. This is another tool in the toolkit to address open use. There's a lot of, I think, complacency and impunity in the act of open drug use in downtown Bellingham, and I think we need to find a way to disrupt that activity. And this ordinance, we think, that would go some distance towards that. It would provide an ability for our police to, among other things, confiscate drugs. We're proposing in tandem with this also creation of given the fact that there are booking restrictions at the jail, an opportunity to create a new process at the municipal court at which so that we'd be able to take people directly to the court and get them under the jurisdiction of the municipal court judge and create an opportunity to provide services, some services that I think presently exist, but we're proposing a therapeutic court to more broadly avail people who are in need of services so that they can get the help that they need. By taking action on the ordinance, I think we're declaring an appropriate community standard of what we expect on our public streets. Hopefully, it would instill some confidence amongst many of the people that enjoy downtown and work downtown that things are going to get better. So towards that end, I've asked our city attorney to just be available to answer questions about the ordinance itself. Judge Lev is here, as I said, to offer thoughts on what a therapeutic court could be, and the chief is here to talk about the value of the ordinance. We're not intending to go into detail today as it relates to the process of setting up the therapeutic court. I think it's enough to hear about the value of it. Our intention is, that is, myself and Judge Lev intend to partner actively to prioritize and assess what would be needed to stand up a therapeutic court, and we'll come back to you with more answers to those questions in the very near term. So with that, I'm happy to do that which you would like, Mr. Chair, or just allow Judge Lev an opportunity to speak to the therapeutic court at this time.
I just want to provide committee members an opportunity to ask any questions on the mayor's remarks If you have none, we can just go straight to the judge and then the police chief. Okay, seeing none, let's go to Judge Love.
Thank you, Council. This is going to be just a summary of what a therapeutic court could mean to this community. Not on. I'm happy to come back at a later date and give you a more comprehensive indication of what a community court is, but I'm going to start with the Center for Court Innovation defines a community court. Community courts are neighborhood-focused courts that attempt to harness the power of the justice system to address local problems. They strive to engage outside stakeholders such as residents, merchants, churches, schools in new ways in an effort to bolster public trust in justice. And they test new approaches to reduce both crime and incarceration. So therapeutic courts need to be the norm rather than the exception. I'll just start out by telling you that, and I use the terms interchangeably, community court and therapeutic court. We already have a well-established mental health court in Bellingham Municipal. It's, and some of the council members here today have attended graduations for members of that wellness court. It's working, and it's making a positive impact on not only the individuals that participate in it, but also the community at large. So this is the same kind of idea, only expanded. It not only covers a diagnosed behavioral health condition, but also so many other issues that individuals are facing in our community, and we want to help. So community courts are specialty therapeutic courts. They use a combined strategy of holding participants accountable while connecting them to social services to help address the root causes of crime. They take an individual and trauma-informed approach rather than the traditional punitive approach that's typically seen in the criminal justice system. They utilize a collaborative, problem-solving approach to crime. It's individualized justice, and that goal is to provide the practical, targeted solutions rather than the traditional punishment. We work within the community to find partners for housing services, education, employment, alcohol and drug rehabilitation, some mental health services that wouldn't be necessarily solely in the mental health court, veteran services, as well as other pro-social connections. The end goal is to restore the person and community, all while cutting overall financial costs for the community. So I'm not going to go into too much detail as far as actually establishing it. As the mayor indicated, we do plan on having this partnership coming up with those details. I'll give you some examples of offenses that are covered by community court that are applicable to our situation here in the city. Theft in the third degree, possessing stolen property in the third degree, unlawful issuance of checks, urinating in public, prostitution, patronizing a prostitute, making a false or misleading statement to a public servant, obstructing a law enforcement officer, resisting arrest, escape, opening or consuming liquor in public, furnishing liquor to minors, minor purchasing or attempting to purchase, unlawful inhalation, disorderly conduct. I mean, the list goes on and on. Vandalism, malicious mischief, vehicle prowl, reckless burning in the second degree, possession of marijuana. We target those individuals that want help. I mean, obviously, they're going to need to want that help in order to succeed in our therapeutic court. We then enlist partnerships in the community. I'll give you examples of some of these partnerships. Food Bank, DSHS, Goodwill, chemical dependency providers, mental health providers that aren't covered in our mental health court because that's isolated to behavioral health issues. Housing, job training, driver licensing, reinstatement, driver accountability. It's an innovative response that serves as an alternative to fines or jail to improve traffic safety. And also, this is handled through a an SOC model, which is, that means the participants enter into a stipulated order of continuance for their case, and then they agree to certain mandates, essentially. But for those of you that have been in our wellness calendar and seen how that's handled, it's a whole different ballgame than regular criminal court. The atmosphere is different, the support is there. It uses positive reinforcement. Individuals that we've had in our wellness calendar have clearly indicated it's the first time in their life sometimes that they felt like a person and that people care. And that's the whole point, is that we do care. And we have seen over and over and over again that at the cost of, $160 or so a day in Whatcom County Jail, if we could get them in, by the way, or $180 through the SCORE facility, we have seen at a cost that the probable benefit for the offender and the taxpayer is about zero. You know, you put them in jail, release, what do we expect them to do when they get out of jail, when they've received no services or very little services? They're going to go right back and do the same thing because that's what they know, and they haven't been provided the wraparound services that a community court can do. So I'm very enthusiastic about it. I know that it's going to take a lot of work, but jail doesn't change behavior, and we see from the models across the country and in our own state that this does change. It's a change for the better. We find that defendants perceive the court process, that when defendants perceive the court process to be fair, exhibiting respect, understanding, neutral decision-making, helpfulness, that they are more likely to comply with the court orders and follow the law in the future. And isn't that what we want, is to better the individual and therefore better the community? This is a strong emphasis on community service, and participants will go to the location, downtown, essentially, and give back through community service. We have those that like to tag, clean up the graffiti, redirect that talent into something more beneficial for the community and for the individual. So I've been wanting to do a community court for a very long time. We have always had the philosophy at Bellingham Municipal Court that rehabilitation far exceeds any incarceration. I truly believe, both personally and professionally, that anybody is capable of change. And that is how we already deal with those individuals before the court. But a community court with all of the support of the providers, prosecution, defense, if everyone is supportive of that end goal, then I can't see anything happening except for a change for the better, not only for that person, but also for our town. So in a nutshell, that's what therapeutic courts are about, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have. I do also have some specific examples of those that have successfully completed and in other courts that we would be modeling after, so I'm happy to share those with you as well.
Committee members, questions? Councilmember Martins.
Just to, get my footing before we move on. Judge Love, everything you were reading was information that's available in the world. It wasn't anything specific to Bellingham or Whatcom County, though. Is that correct? I just want to get my bearings.
I'm not sure I clearly understand the question.
I can rephrase.
The philosophy applies to Bellingham as well as across the nation.
But there's nothing
The
drafted.
implementation, we do not have, other than our mental health court, which is modeled after what I've just indicated to you.
I know, one follow-up on that. How long did it take to get the wellness court up and operational?
I would have to, it's been operational for a while, so I'd have to look back and see. You're talking about the planning stages?
Yes, since it would be pretty similar. I'm just curious how long it would actually take to get us into a therapeutic court or have it operational.
I don't know that I can give you a precise time frame. I could certainly give you one for mental health court, because that's already established. We would be tapping into some of those resources, I would imagine. Again, that would be something that we'd want to assemble to see what's available. My discussions with others that are involved in the wellness court, there may be some services we can tap into to make this more expedited. But generally, I can get you that answer as far as the mental health court, because that's a specific time frame, but I can't give you that for this yet. It depends on how many, or how much service do we want to provide, and it's going to be a step-by-step endeavor. I know that doesn't give you exactly what you want, but I can certainly tell you as far as the mental health court goes. I just have to go back and find out.
And as I said, we're committed to partnering to do the assessments that are required. If we get positive feedback from council on therapeutic court, we'll put the resources towards this and prioritize this. And I think we'll be able to come back to you with a better answer as it relates to time frames based on whatever assumptions we have about resources and needs.
Councilmember Huffman, then Anderson.
Well, Councilmember Martins took my question, but I'll come up with another one here. So, shoot, and I had it, and I just lost it. Oh, yes. So, council doesn't vote on establishing the court or not, clearly, but is there anything that council can do to support the idea? Is there anything that you'll be asking of us down the road?
Some of the research that I have done into courts across the nation and our own state indicate, well, obviously there's a funding issue, but some courts, well, there's different funding options. Council would be obviously involved if we requested funding. There are grants available, and through AOC, they have assistance in writing grants, federal grants, writing. There's a court that has operated within our state, according to my research, and I have calls into the judge, where they rely heavily on volunteers and haven't requested funding. I don't know that that's realistic for a town our size, but it depends on the need, of course. So that would be, if council is involved, it would be more of a funding kind of request or information for your consideration.
Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I apologize for my voice. I got laryngitis.
I tried to do court that way.
It is so hard to talk right now, but so important. I'm just going to kind of do a dump. I have a lot of thoughts on this. First, a little disappointed because this is coming forward as a vote to approve, and I don't think any council member weighed in on this for the development, and it's legislation, and we have a safety committee, and I would have thought that they would have been on the ground floor to work on crafting this. So that's the disappointment, is that this comes to us. It also sets us up in a really bad position. We're supposed to, I remember a workshop where I took heat from people because we're supposed to work together and not put each other in a bad position. So the bad position is our downtown is hurting, and we hear from those businesses, and we need to do something to support them better. And we've been trying with the ambassador program. We've been trying to shore up and get more officers trained, get back to community policing. So there's steps being taken. But some of the emails I've received from businesses, they want us to vote to approve this. They think this is going to fix the issue, and it's not, because it's the cart before the horse. We do not have the therapeutic court developed. We don't have the resources in place. So what's going to happen is there's going to be an expectation we're going to clean up downtown and arrest our way out of this. And we're not going to be able to do that because the really important element is that we have the support that if somebody is arrested, They're going to be able to go into therapeutic court. They're going to be able to get help with treatment. They're going to be able to help diversion. They're going to be able to help housing. They're going to be able to be scaffolded to be successful. We don't have that ready. So this says vote to approve. I cannot vote to approve something unless we have the other element ready to go so that we're successful. Because we're just going to be arresting people and putting them back on the street. And if this is about the ability to confiscate drugs, to discourage the activity downtown, then let's look at that. I don't know the current system as far as being able to basically give them the card. So if somebody's injecting downtown or smoking fentanyl, I assume an officer can make contact, can confiscate, give them the little card that says that they could serve treatment. And it happens a couple of times, and then they could be arrested. And I might be wrong on that, but it's really difficult because we do need to fix it. This isn't quite it. It is part of a puzzle, and it's one piece of the picture, and we can't see the picture unless we have the other pieces of the puzzle together. And the reason why this puts us in a bad light is because those downtown businesses that are struggling, they expect us to fix this today, and we don't have the capacity to do that. We can't arrest ourselves out of this. We just can't. It didn't work over the last 30 years. Drug addiction is something that is not able to be arrested out of. Drug addiction can be supported out of it with the right support structures in place. Law enforcement is part of that puzzle, and I support the law enforcement being part of that puzzle. I've seen our officers very compassionately working with individuals, and the people I've talked with, they want to help the people who need the treatment, but we don't have the treatment. We don't have the housing, and it is a national problem. So I wish that we would have been consulted, and I wish we could have started the steps to start putting in place the therapeutic court. And in the meantime, what do we need to continue to enhance downtown? I don't know if this is it. I mean, are we at the end of the line of the resources? Is it more ambassadors? Is it being able to take some of our law enforcement? I know we're thin, but can we have a couple of people do foot patrol? I mean, those are things. Do we have anything else on the books that just need to be enforced? So I know I'm talking a lot, but I'm really struggling with this because I'm just disappointed that it says vote to approve. And this is, I read it in the Herald before it came before me and before I had a conversation about it. And that's disappointed.
Councilmember Williams.
I think a lot of my questions have to do with what are the surrounding services that are going to be provided. And I believe that conceptually, in the broader picture, this looks pretty good. But when I say the broader picture, just like Councilman Anderson said, the other pieces have to be in place to provide those wraparound services and all of that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to defer my questions until I hear from Chief Mertzig, and I don't know if Alan Mariner is going to speak, but I think I'm going to defer my questions until I hear from all of them.
Thank you, Councilman Williams. I have about 25 questions. Some of them have been brought up, and I'm sure others will be bringing those up as well, that have to do not just with the court, the setting up of the court, and how long that takes. It's not tomorrow. This is, in talking with someone who works at municipal court, last week, it was well over a year. So I feel like the cart got put before the horse in terms, there's an order of operations when it comes to how we lay out programs and how we put together needs or resources for complex needs. And there's, in the ordinance here, there are 3 programs that are cited: the ground level response and coordinated engagement, law enforcement assisted diversion team, and the alternate response team. I was the lead policymaker on all 3 of those programs, and it took us about 8 months to create the GRACE program. It took us about almost a year to create the LEAD program, and it took almost 2 years to get the ART off the ground. Partially that had to do with the COVID pandemic. When we're dealing with human beings, we have to do so with care, as you indicated, that a therapeutic court should be about care and should be about restoration of the individual, access to services, things like that. The LEAD program and the GRACE program attempt to do that. They would serve about 180 people at any given time, and they have case managers that work with about up to 20 people, clients, and they have a huge success rate because they're dealing with core root causes and root issues as to why a person is doing what they're doing and making contact with the criminal justice system. I too will reserve my questions for after Chief Mertzig speaks. Do any other committee members want to chime in at this point, or do you want to just wait? Okay, we'll go ahead and have your presentation, Chief.
Also, could we just get a clarification? I think City Attorney Alan Mariner wanted to just make an observation.
I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
So I was asked to draft this ordinance. It's a very simple ordinance. It's a couple sentences. It's modeled after an ordinance adopted by Marysville at the end of last year. We followed up, our office followed up with John Walker, the city attorney for Marysville, and he said that it has made a big difference in lowering the incidence of using controlled substances in public places. And so the mayor came, I think the police chief came forward saying, with this ordinance from Marysville, and it's basically in response to what we're hearing from people, and we're getting videos of people openly using in front of mallards on the steps of the library. And all this is doing is putting use of a controlled substance on the same footing as use of alcohol or marijuana in public places. It's saying you can't use the controlled substance in a public place. It does not criminalize the use or the possession. And John Walker from Marysville said it made a big difference in just the perception in the downtown area of Marysville as far as people openly using it. People are still using it, they're just not doing it right in front of everybody else. And then the last thing I would say, and I don't know if this is relevant to the discussion today, but I think Councilmember Anderson, I don't know whether you want a clarification on what the current law is with regards to using and possessing controlled substances, because that's an ever-evolving thing right now in the state of Washington.
I know that currently there's a state bill that just passed the House, and it's going on to the Senate, that basically would make recriminalize possession of drugs to a gross misdemeanor. So I know it's ever changing. And I had questions later about how will that affect this. But I guess my concern is the aspect of arresting and not having the other services on the other side. And if it's a matter of confiscation, because those are some of the emails we've received from people. I want to know, what options do we have? If we put this in place, does an individual have to be arrested in order to have their drugs confiscated? And if they're arrested, what happens to them? Where do they go? Because we don't have space in the jail. And if we don't have services ready for them, it becomes a revolving door.
Okay.
What happens if they're arrested 20 times and does it ratchet up and it becomes a worse offense for them?
Okay. And
So there are questions.
yeah, so I think Police Chief Herzog could answer some of those. Also, I would say that Ryan Anderson, our lead prosecutor, is here and can answer questions as far as the current, what the police can and cannot do given the current state of the law.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I want to address this as first of all, I'm on the same page as Councilmember Anderson. I do not believe we can arrest our way out of this problem. What this ordinance would do for us if it were enacted, right now, currently, we've all expressed frustration of we give you a card with treatment options and that's it. That's all that happens. From an operational perspective for law enforcement, this ordinance would give us a whole slew of other options, and it can range. At the very low end of the range is simply that verbal warning. We could hand you that same card. We could issue you a citation and release you right then and there. You would still have to go to court. We could call our partners, and I'll go through the acronyms that were listed. We have law enforcement assisted diversion, there's MCOT, there's ART, there's the GRACE team, there's the HOT team. There are 6 beds right now available at our crisis stabilization center for substance abuse. So we have a lot of options. Our officers use a lot of discretion in a compassionate way, in my opinion. You absolutely could make an arrest, bring them over to Whatcom County, search them, take their drugs if they had them on them, and they would be released right then and there, absolutely. And then last and final is the other end of the spectrum is taking them to SCORE. Now, obviously, we want to avoid that. There's a lot of costs associated with that. And our officers aren't just doing that constantly because they know that that's going to take a long time to go to drive, and that might not be the best option for that person. I'm really excited about the prospect of a drug court, a therapeutic court here, but I do believe this is an answer to the community problem we're having here where fentanyl is just ravaging our community. Last year, there were 70 calls of overdose in the city of Bellingham. Year to date, it is at 87 today. It's been 2.5 months. So I don't look at this as a victimless crime. Last week, my staff responded to an overdose death of a 15-year-old and a 5-year-old. So I'm here in a place of just heartbrokenness and compassion for folks that are struggling with this problem. We're not, and my staff is the same way, we're not just looking to have a reason to arrest people. It is a tool that allows them to engage with somebody that we didn't have before.
Go ahead, Councilmember Martins, and I'm going to take a turn.
I'll hit on a couple things then, just kind of all over the map. I will say that going back to the ordinance itself, whereas number 5, the use of controlled substances without a prescription or medical supervision is more likely to result in addiction. And I found that almost to be a slap in the face. AG Ferguson was just successful in getting a settlement for $518 million against Purdue and the Sackler family and everything that has to do with that, and how prescription opioids really fueled us to this crisis. And it's the little classist. It definitely falls under being a little bit racist and saying that if it's prescription, it's good. And medical supervision is great, really leaving out the fact that opioids helped fuel this exact crisis, but also if you are in the cycle of poverty, which happens to coincide very heavily with people of color, all of a sudden, if you were able to get a prescription from a doctor, that would have been fine, and somehow did not lead to the mess that we're in right now. So whereas 5 freaks me out a lot and really makes me very sad. Whereas 6, when we're all the acronyms and saying we have these in place and they're doing a great job, I would love to know if any of these 3 entities were contacted on their thoughts on what is in right now, as we are leaning on them as how we are alternatively responding to this crisis, but did we include them in this conversation? And then I don't know if anyone here can actually speak on it, but I would like to talk about the elephant in the room of having 4 ODs in our county jail, I think February 23rd. So where Has that been thought about in the construct of this conversation? And if we are just going to keep criminalizing drug use, and even at the place that these people who are in desperate need of help might end up, there is still drug use. Where are we going with this, especially if a therapeutic court, community court is still an idea, nothing is on paper, and it possibly at the quickest pace we can get that up and running is 8-ish months, as far as Councilmember Hamel can remember from his work on all of these acronyms. The way that this is written right now, if it were passed today, essentially by about the middle of April, this could be in effect. What will happen to all of these people if this is passed, and if this is in effect if we don't have a therapeutic or community court? I think that's my brain dump.
Okay. I'm going to take a quick turn and then I'll call on other committee members. So I spoke with the county prosecutor, who's the elected person, last week just over text, and asked him for clarity on the charges that bring people to the county drug court, and those are all felony charges. So there's a tremendous amount of leverage that is happening for people to say, look, this feels like rock bottom, and I'm given an opportunity to go through, in some cases, a 2-year-long process through the county's drug court. I've been at graduations there, have been at the wellness court, the mental health court graduations as well. And it's in the drug court, they take the stack of charges and they put them through a shredder. And sometimes the shredder gets really slowed down because the charges were there's a lot of them. And there's like a lot of cheering and a lot of sense of accomplishment at the end of those hearings. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is if we're talking about a misdemeanor charge, how, and they won't be going to the county jail. The county jail, let's just be clear, they don't accept misdemeanor charges unless they're gross misdemeanor charges, which is assault for domestic violence or DUI, driving while under the influence, and the DUI charge individuals they let go after about 24 hours because there's no space there at that facility. So I don't understand what the leverage, what the expectations around the leverage would be if a person is facing a misdemeanor charge. And to your point, City Attorney, I disagree with going toe-to-toe with comparing this to smoking marijuana or drinking in public. Those are infractions. That's a ticket. This is a misdemeanor. It's a little bit different. But a misdemeanor, I just don't think is enough. I guess I don't understand if that's enough leverage to get a person who's addicted to one of the most, if not the most, substance ever known to humankind. And we're not even talking about tranq yet. So Ziazoline, which is on its way north here, that is the horse sedative that would be combined with fentanyl that we cannot Narcan out of a person's body. So that, talking about overdoses, I hear your compassion and I share it. Nobody wants to see people in those situations or on the front steps of the library or out in front of the ice cream shop downtown or in public, using. It's just not, there's no benefit to that. And so trying to provide an off-ramp for that person for their addiction and providing services is something that I fully get behind. That's what these programs that I worked on, that's what they were all about, is providing some type of off-ramp for an individual so they're not out there using in public. I don't want to see that. I don't know anyone that wants to see that. Letting a person languish, however, in their addiction is also not humane to me. Incarcerating that person solely based on their addiction is also not humane to me. I've been on 2 tours of that jail in the last month and a half, and there are people with mental health illnesses that are awaiting competency restoration from Western State. I think there's about 40 individuals there, and they're in tanks with 25 other people who they can't get away from, and it just feels like people are being re-traumatized over and over again. So this war that we've created over the last 40 years is an abject failure. However, that being said, I fully support the downtown merchants. I fully support people going and shopping and recreating, dining downtown and socializing. I've lived here for 34 years. The downtown is in my ward, and I've seen it go from a ghost town when I first moved here because everything went to the mall to a sense of vibrancy about, I don't know, 10 years ago, and then up to about 5 or 6 years ago, and then things started to change. And I think that's when fentanyl started to really make its way into our community. So I don't understand the leverage on the misdemeanor charge. I don't know if that's enough for a person to say, okay, I'm ready to change. I don't want to. We're not doing felonies for possession. I think that's ridiculous. But I just don't know if the misdemeanor charge is enough. And then I also have questions on the logistics of how this would work. So to take a person to court that's open from 8 until 5, Monday through Friday, what happens if a person is seen downtown using and they are picked up by the police? What happens to them? Are they subject to a different set of rules because they were arrested during a different time of the day? Do their drugs get confiscated as well? I just don't understand the logistics of that. And these details matter to me. They matter very much. I think to what I've heard from council as well, that we want to know what it is we're being asked to do. And I think this process got a little bit, I'll get you in a minute, Councilmember Williams. I think this process got out of order, where we should have been, as the chair of the Public Health, Safety, and Justice Committee, we should have been working on this in tandem with the administration. I would be happy, thrilled to try to come up with solutions for those that are addicted, and providing them an opportunity to not just survive but thrive. Go ahead, Councilmember Williams and Huttman.
I think what I'm hearing for the most part is a basic agreement with the overall concept. But I know the biggest question I had or have is, if we pass this ordinance today, what are the services and when I say that we agree with the overall concept is getting people the help or the assistance they need to overcome their addiction to drugs. That's the overall concept. And to get them in that situation as quickly as possible. But that would be if everything were more or less in place and ready to go. So until that time happens, if we pass this ordinance, what are the pieces that are in place to meet that goal now? Other than what Chief Mertzik had to say. Can the court handle those cases that quickly? Are there enough prosecutors and defense attorneys on call or whatever to give the person arrested or whatever the right resources to meet their constitutional rights? Are there services currently available that can take them to, and I know there are some, but I think those are the things that we would like to hear about making this overall concept workable now, if we were to pass this ordinance.
Lots and lots of questions. Let me just first say, because I'm responsible for the pace at which this has come before council, and I certainly understand directly and otherwise sense that there was a hope that this would have come before us differently. As I've shared with a number of you with whom I've spoken about this in the last week or 10 days, this was responsive to not just what I perceived, but what clearly was and is a sense of crisis downtown. And to a large degree, that sense of concern is a function of open use. And so this came forward quickly in response to that. Councilmember Anderson, I appreciate what you're saying. I think we all have come to work well together. The sequence that you talked about legislatively is one that I appreciate as a former council member. I think that I would probably feel the same way if I were all of you, just as it relates to that. Perhaps the agenda bill could have been said discussion as opposed to move to pass. I support passage of this for the reasons that I've provided, but from your legislative perspective, I understand how it could have come forward differently. We're not trying to oversell this as it relates to the benefits of it. Nobody thinks that it's going to be a cure-all. It's one more tool available to benefit, I would hope, a lot of different people, not just community members, but also individuals that are addicted. Clearly, this wasn't brought before you with an expectation that we were going to just further incarcerate for a variety of reasons. We all broadly agree that therapy is needed, that we need some kind of humane response to people that are suffering from addiction. So there wasn't an expectation that this was going to be something where we would be able to incarcerate more people, quite aside from the fact that that's not available to us, even if there was an inclination to do so. I know there's a range of opinions in this community around how we should approach these problems. Widespread spectrum of views, and I think the object is to try and reach a broad agreement around an appropriate course. The question of whether or not to adopt the ordinance separate from having a fully engaged and implemented therapeutic court is an open question that you get to weigh in on, and I'm hearing you today. We think there's some value in having this, declaring this as a community expectation and standard that you cannot do this in our community. It's against the law to do that. I'm hoping that it would have the effect of disrupting open brazen use on our public streets. To me, that's an appropriate thing. But you get to make that decision. In the coming weeks, we will organize more presentations to present you information along the lines of all the things that you've asked and better answer some of those questions.
Before I call on CM Huffman and Stone, Chief Mertzig, you wanted to respond here?
I just wanted to add, I agree with you. I don't think a misdemeanor is going to stop someone's addiction. I do think it will make them think twice about openly using in public. And maybe it gets them on the path, right? Maybe that intervention gets them along those lines because we have that laundry list of options for them.
Thank you. I hear you. Let's refrain from responding to comments here. Judge Lev.
I just wanted to clarify that the alcohol offenses, those are misdemeanors as well. So law enforcement, and I'm here representing the judicial branch, okay? Whatever they decide to do as far as enforcement or legislation, that's up to the respective branches. But what I can tell you is we're already seeing those people when they decide to appear in court. The option of bringing to court, and I can't answer the weekend option unless we open up court on the weekends. But during the week, we used to do this with warrants being served because they'd be served and we go through the revolving door of a warrant being served, and then the person fails to appear at their assigned court date and time, and then we'd issue the warrant again. So what we did with warrants is the officers would go, they'd serve the warrants, and they'd bring them directly to court to address the criminal charges. So this was just an idea of, well, perhaps it would be of some assistance if law enforcement, if they arrested, which essentially is writing the citation and giving them a promise to appear in court, instead of the promise to appear in court, they would come directly to court. And if we had buy-in from prosecution and defense, which we have at every court proceeding anyways, we would just extend the court session if it was someone being brought over and address them as first appearance right then. It's always in a community court, therapeutic court situation, it's the prosecution's determination of whether that person should be offered or if they're eligible to enter into the community court path versus the criminal court path. So that lies with the prosecution, but they would have a screening and they would go through the screening and they would make that determination on the spot and then talk with the public defender who we provide at every court session, whether or not you're eligible for a public funded attorney. They're there at the first appearance or arraignment, and then they can advise their client whether they might want to enter into the community court path. And we go from there. We already do have some of those next steps in place for our wellness calendar, so we would have to try to put together similar resources for a community court so that we can then send the person on to pretrial supervision, call it whatever you want to call it in community court, but then we'd have that person monitored. They would have goals. There are stages, just like wellness court. The incentive is that when you're facing 20 different criminal charges and faced with the prospect of, hey, I could go to jail on each of these for 90 or 364 or whatever it is, or I can accept some of the services that are being offered to me, go through the program for whatever, 6 months, 12 months, 18, 24, whatever it is, because it's individualized. They give their right up to a jury trial, so if they don't follow through, they don't get a trial, per se, and they can be sanctioned with whatever jail could be imposed from the get-go. Instead, if they make it through the program and connect with the community, then all of those charges are dismissed, as you indicated, in drug court and in superior court. That's what we do in wellness. It means a lot to these individuals to have this litany of charges dismissed at the end of a successful completion of the program. And you've seen it. They are a different person. Maybe you didn't see all of that, but you see how they are at the end at graduation. We see when they come in how they are, and when they are successfully graduating, they are a completely different person contributing to our community. We want to address these other situations and bring in more and have them benefit from a therapeutic court. Whether or not you ultimately pass, when you do, or if you don't, we're still going to put together a therapeutic court because it makes sense. It's the humane way to serve justice in the community. So just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Judge. If it pleases the committee, I'd like to call Ryan Anderson, our city prosecutor, down to the podium to be available to answer questions. Since the judge brought up the prosecutorial, yeah, just the podium's fine, component of the court. Hey, Mr. Anderson, thank you for joining us. Yeah, just make sure your mic's on.
Yeah, Ryan Anderson with the City Attorney's Office. I'm the lead prosecutor for the city.
Okay. Did you have anything to add to the judge's comments?
As it relates to, well, I have a lot of things from a lot of things have been said, but I can just say, I can try to focus. It has been an issue for us to find participants sometimes with the leverage that you're talking about for mental health court. I've talked to the county has a system as well, but they do a lot of drop downs from felonies because the stakes are higher. So it can be certainly something that's difficult. The thing that we've studied with community court for a number of years, Spokane has a great model, and they've done it for years. It works out of the library. Is finding those people with those lower level, trespass is a real big one, right? Especially for downtown merchants, right? How do you stop the trespass? Really, what we want is behavior correction, right? And so, you get people who literally have a number of charges, theft related, trespass, and how do we stop the behavior, right? And so I think that's where community court can be a really great option. But a lot of times it's not going to be just having that one offense or that one crime. It's going to have to be a buildup of things. So to your point, I do think it is a legitimate issue. It's not the leverage issue is something we're seeing in mental health court. I had a conversation with Robin, who runs the mental health court, the coordinator for both the county and the city, and about how do we increase the city's participation. And so that's a real thing. So I don't want to say that's not there. It's true. I think community court could have a higher capacity. In fact, probably a higher membership. It's because the number of charges and types of charges we have relating to things that happen to our downtown. So I think it is a real positive. One of the things that I'll say, and I'm not here to advocate for one thing or the other, but I will say, having done this job for 17 years, having worked with the police, one of the things, and we've talked about changing laws in the past or, getting rid of something or doing something. One of the things that I've often heard from the police is even if they don't have something on, even if they're not going to necessarily arrest or cite if it is, and drinking in public is an infraction. But even if they're not going to issue that ticket, it is nice to be able to at least say, hey, what you're doing is illegal. Stop doing it. And that's what I think part of where we're at, right? Is that there's a brazenness. Everybody, I've heard the word used, a few times by everybody. And I think that's part of it is, first of all, it is still technically illegal under the state law. It is illegal. We just haven't adopted it by reference, so we're not citing it or doing anything in the city of Bellingham, which is a choice that we've made. Not me personally, but that's been made. And that law expires in July, and that's going to be replaced. That's what you're referencing. They have to replace it. It was sunsetted. It is still illegal to knowingly possess or use narcotics. It's in the 6950 or 103. And it is a misdemeanor. That's the two, handing them the card the 2 times. But for the city to enforce it, we'd have to pass it by reference. We can't just, we'd have or create our own law. What I'm trying to get at here is to be able to say to someone, hey, you can't do that. It's illegal. Don't urinate on the street, right? We have a law that says you can't do that. Whether you cite or not, I know that the police have often said that having that tool in the toolkit is valuable, right? And even just stopping or curbing that behavior. And maybe that's, I don't know where this discussion should go or what it should look like necessarily, but there is, when you can't even say that, that cascades to a lot of things, right? When you can't tell someone who's using fentanyl in front of your business, the police kind of stand there and go, well, it's not illegal. There's no conversation, there's no engagement, there's certainly no confiscation of drugs, there's really nothing. And what you probably see, and again, I'm not trying to speak for the police, I've done this a long time, I'm certainly not an officer, is the police even sort of lose sort of perspective, hope, whatever, well, nothing I can do. And that's frustrating. That's frustrating for everybody. And I'm again, there's no silver bullets to this conversation, but I think that's where we're at, right? There's no discussion, there's no engagement at all, because what you have is an activity that essentially is not illegal in the city of Bellingham. And so there's no, hey, why don't you stop this guy from using drugs? And the answer is, well, I can't, because there's nothing illegal about it. And so I don't know, to me, that's just something to think about. I'm not, again, advocating for one thing or the other here, but I'm just saying that is something that I know police have asked for, is, man, it'd be nice to at least be able to say, hey, the activity you're engaging in right now is whatever it is, an infraction, a misdemeanor, a felony, whatever it is, you can't do it, right? You can't do that. And you can't even have that conversation at this point. So to me, I'll just throw that out there. Yeah, I think that's, I don't know, I could probably keep going on, but any other questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thanks for coming down, Ryan. I've got Councilmember Huthman and Stone have been waiting patiently. I'll get to you right after that, Councilmember Williams, and then to Anderson.
Thank you. I probably have an hour's worth of things to say, but I'll try to make it 5. I really appreciate that it feels like, while this seems like a really simple ordinance, it's not. It's a very complex one, and that there's a lot of conversation happening for a reason. In my opinion, when it comes to policy regarding drugs, we have to be very careful. And I can see that others think the same, which is heartening. I mean, we have a history of really bad drug policy, and a lot of that came from feelings of panic, hysteria, urgency. We created laws that were counterproductive, and so going forward, I think it's really important that we're putting a lot of thought into laws that we create surrounding drug use. This subject definitely did not have enough time for me to form a good opinion, a well-informed opinion in just a couple of days. But I did do a really deep dive on decriminalization policy and around the world. And you know, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the Blake decision by the Supreme Court. Kind of threw decriminalization down without our society really giving a chance to build some structure in preparation for that. So that's kind of what we're dealing with now. We're doing a little bit of scrambling to figure out what kind of structure do we need to deal with this. I 100% believe that decriminalization is the wave of the future. It's the way to go. It's the way to deal with our drug problems. But decriminalization does not mean no rules. And even policy around the world that is held up as some of the best and some of the most effective, there's still rules. There's still rules regarding possession. There's still rules regarding public use. And so I think that what we really need to get at here is what sorts of rules around drug use in our community are going to lead us to the kind of results that we're hoping for. For one, I'm a downtown business owner. I have been for 12 years. I've been a downtown person for decades. I'm downtown a lot. I feel comfortable downtown, just as comfortable as I've always been. And I don't see a lot of drug use. That said, I'm in the minority when it comes to feeling safe downtown. I realize that. Survey results from the business Chamber of Commerce, thank you, reflect that. People don't feel as safe downtown as they used to. And I know that seeing people use drugs downtown contributes to that. But also that same community surveyed of downtown business owners and employees, when they are asked what kinds of solutions would you like to see, they say more mental health options and more law enforcement in tandem. And I think that gets at the heart of the nuance of this issue, is that there is no one answer to this. It is a complex problem. We need complex solutions. This one ordinance is not going to be a silver bullet if it passes. And I hope there's a lot more discussion before we get to that. But and so I think Councilmember Martins brought up a great point about involving other providers of community resources in this conversation, and I think a little bit more of assurance that this is an evidence-based solution that has basis in truly getting us the results that we're looking for. So at this point, I'm certainly not prepared to vote on this ordinance that we're being asked to vote for. The mayor has stated that is, an option that he is certainly open to. Okay, I think I got most of it in 5 minutes. Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Stone.
Thank you. So I, first, just in trying not to replicate things that have been said, I think I can say that I agree with pretty much everything that fellow council members have shared, and I really appreciate the discussion. My concern is that I'm not certain that this ordinance, right, accomplishes the goal or addresses the need. And so as the mayor outlined, sort of it's in response to this sense of crisis in downtown directly related to open use. And so that makes me think, well, so it's really, if it's with respect to specifically use, because it says use, not possession or intoxication or that you're under the influence of something, it's sort of that idea that, well, if you can't see it, people just don't want to see it, right? I'm downtown in my business, I'm going to the restaurant, I'm going shopping, and I don't want to see it. So make it so that it happens somewhere else. Well, to me, that's, akin to what we're struggling with respect to our unhoused community. And if we just continue to move people around, right, does that actually address the underlying problem that we're trying to address with respect to the individual as well as the broader community? And so I'm a little unclear about a couple of things. One is, so the whereas, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the seventh whereas on page 121 states that state law now requires that persons subject to arrest for possession of a controlled substance be referred to assessment and services in lieu of arrest at least twice before he or she may be arrested. So a couple of things about that is, one, we've talked about the frustration that law enforcement have with handing over a card. So in my mind, that should be a referral for assessment and services is more than handing someone a card. It would be sort of a direct referral and engagement in something else. And so if this ordinance then on 122 is saying it's unlawful for any person to knowingly use a controlled substance in a public place unless the controlled substance has been lawfully prescribed, and nod to Councilmember Martins on, just some issues related to separating those out and the implications of that. But if we're focusing on use specifically, then it seems like you're depending on law enforcement to encounter somebody at that exact moment when they are actively, engaging in use. The syringe is in their arm or they're actively smoking. So to me, I don't know, that seems like a very, very narrow opportunity for engagement. And so looking at our existing laws, it seems to me that the judicial branch, thank you, Judge Lev, for being here, very excited about discussions about a therapeutic court and expanding the wellness court as we know it. The enforcement branch, thank you very much, Chief Marsick, for being here. And the prosecution, so having city attorneys here as well. We currently have, as you were talking, Chief Marsick, options about verbal warnings, citations, contacting partners, whether there are beds open, making an arrest, confiscating drugs and releasing, or score, or others. To me, if there's confiscation of the drugs, again, I don't know that that gets us any further down the path, because now you have someone who's in need of drugs because of their addiction, and now they're without them. And so to me, that's going to escalate or increase criminal activity maybe surrounding that particular instance, unless they are actively engaged in some sort of treatment. But my understanding is that those options, are still available to law enforcement now. And similarly, in the judicial branch, stipulated orders of continuance can still happen, and we can, if prosecution agrees, these other options can be pursued currently, is my understanding, under the system as it currently functions. And I understand that maybe there's not significant enough sort of carrot and stick to entice people to take advantage of those options and actually engage in those services. So again, that's a whole nother issue. So getting to my question, I guess it's probably for Chief Mertzig and perhaps City Attorney, is do we not have something on the books now with respect to public intoxication, whether that be alcohol or drugs or other, where if someone is creating a disturbance that you can't engage?
Well, that's a different crime, right? If someone is, so I guess tell me a story. Give me an example.
Well, I'm just thinking about downtown, what I witnessed. My office is downtown. I'm downtown all the time as well. Is not necessarily someone sitting outside the office building and actively, using, but walking around downtown and interacting with others who are downtown in maybe it could be a violent or hostile way, but they're currently in a state, right, that is other than sober, we'll say. And so you're saying that law enforcement can't, there's no engagement at that point to say, like, this activity, you're endangering others or whatever the case may be. And I'm just curious what the engagement at that.
It would depend on that safety portion that you talked about. If they're threatening people, if they're violent, then that's a different story than just acting odd.
And I think that, I mean, I know that we want to support the downtown businesses. We also want to support the broader community. And I think, yes, an individual's choice to use drugs is one. If someone's addicted, that may or may not be a choice at that point because the addiction is making choices for you. But I think individually within a community, it's like, well, if you're making these choices or they're making them for you, and then your actions are impacting others around you, right? I mean, that's what you're hearing is this concern that, okay, well, now it's impacting all of us and we're somehow unsafe. My concern is about this sense of crisis where I think we all have individual thresholds and comfort levels interacting and just being around people who are either struggling with a mental health episode or crisis or who are under the influence of, drugs or other things. And so that as well, to me, I have great anxiety setting policy that can be very broad and have unintended consequences that is based on this feeling of fear and crisis that may or may not be, your perception is what it is, and that is valid, but I just have concern about setting policy based on those reactions and then not knowing whether or not what we're actually passing is going to have an impact, or help to engage the individual with services. And so at this point, I think what other council members have highlighted is the fact that if we don't have a therapeutic court and other options in place at this time, then further criminalizing or trying to wrest our way out of addiction is just insane, because I think we've all agreed that that's not going to be productive. And so I would welcome, further discussion, but at this time as well, I have extreme reservations.
Councilmember Williams, then Anderson.
Actually, I was going to ask you something, which is, it seems like what we are talking about is behavior versus anything else. Now, just listening to Councilmember Stone, if I saw somebody walking downtown that was higher than a kite, but just, I didn't see them use the drug, but they were creating some kind of a disturbance of some kind, they wouldn't be arrested for using a drug based on this ordinance. They'd be arrested for what they were doing, perhaps.
Right, if that was
Perhaps, right?
activity, correct, yeah.
Right. And so what this ordinance is specifically addressing is if I see someone actually using. But to me, the meat of this is all, if I can do that and then get them in a situation based on how this all works, immediately get them in a situation where they could be faced with a choice of addressing their addiction or going through the court system. Correct?
I think that's it, yes.
That's it in its essence.
Correct.
But the meat to me is getting them the services and the wraparound stuff that they need. The ordinance is just the trigger point to set that in motion. So my next question is to the judge, is Now, somebody asked you how long would it take to do that, and your answer was, well, I'll have to go look at the way the other court was set up or whatnot. Can you, just by your own experience, perhaps, give us a ballpark on how long it would take you to do that? Just an estimate, not like I got to go look at something else and go 4 months or 3 months or something, but what's your estimate on it? I mean, your guess.
You want my guesstimate?
Guesstimate, yeah.
Okay. It is very complex, as has been indicated, because the problems are complicated. If we prioritized and had prosecution, defense, service providers all on board at the table prioritizing, my guesstimate would be the earliest is 6 months. Can we provide some system before then? Perhaps. But realistically, and some might say 6 months to a year.
Okay. So 6 months to a year, at least your end of the operation could be
To be successful,
correct.
we could do some of what we're already doing for some of the criminal activity that officers are arresting in quotes, for, prior to that, as we
What would those
build
be?
this. I'm sorry?
What would those be?
What, the criminal offenses or the services?
You just said currently people are getting arrested and they come to you and you.
Yes, when they do
So
come to
What would
us.
some of those things be?
They're coming to us for the criminal trespass, for the thefts, for the assaults, for everything that seems to be associated with the underlying problems, whether it be drug addiction, unhoused people, poverty, the whole gamut. They're coming, the ones that are coming to us, we can, in an effort to protect the community as best we can and help the person as best we can pre-trial, is we're putting them under pretrial supervision through the probation department. They're doing alcohol, drug testing. They're, in some cases, we try to find the least restrictive measures to release, as Mr. Anderson well knows, to protect the community, alleged victims, all of those things. We can put them on a bracelet if they have some place that they can be. We can, what are some of the other things we do? The supervision helps because then they're reporting and they're accountable even before the adjudication of their case is complete. So we just try to find the least restrictive measures. We don't want to put them in jail, even if we could, because that doesn't help. So, but the testing, the routine, we've had people say to us, just by virtue of having to report to a probation officer, pretrial supervision, and testing, that structure helps, But yeah, there's relapses, there's all kinds of things we see.
So what I'm hearing you say is that there are, to a certain level, there are pieces that are currently in place in your lane that could be implemented,
Utilized, yeah.
utilized this way.
Yeah, we have a behavioral health unit of the probation department. So if the person needs that assistance, they have that focus.
So how immediate can that be implemented?
It happens
for
at
instance-
first appearance or arraignment. If the person shows up for court,
Okay,
and that's a pretty big if.
that's a if.
Yeah, unless police, bring them directly or some other alternative way of getting them there. And sometimes it's a transportation issue. We're not talking just, people that are downtown. But in any case, that happens at arraignment or first appearance. If the court finds probable cause, then the court has authority to release under conditions. those conditions being monitoring, bracelet, ankle bracelet testing, for alcohol use, all of that. And we're utilizing that now. So we do have those things in place. I just don't want any perception that this is going to be an overnight fix for a therapeutic court to
I
be
don't think any of
established.
us believe it's going to be an overnight fix.
And we didn't
No.
come in thinking that. And I have been, researching this for a number of years, and we thought we'd be ready to hopefully launch, and then, the COVID pandemic sort of put things, to a screeching halt. But, this isn't an overnight research either, we've given it some thought.
So, thank you. My next question, who would be in charge of the prosecution side, you or him?
I think that would be me.
That would be you. So, as you look at the concept of what we are dealing with, putting the ordinance aside as a standalone, what kind of resources would you need to have somebody go to court immediately, if that were available, and put this, get this process going?
Yeah, I mean, some of it's going to be wider than just, you got the structure, but then we're going to need resources like actual, probably, human beings, like, right? We're going to need
Right,
additional,
that's what I'm asking.
additional prosecutors, defense contract will have to be expanded because public defenders will need to be there. So you're looking at, and that's part of why it will take a while, right? Because it's going to be money and it's going to be finding those right fit, like for actual more employees too. So for me, that's going to be a big part of it. We'd have to make some agreements, and city, whoever is the lead of this, would have to also contract with these social, service agencies to actually be present in court. The way it works, like for instance in Spokane, just real quick, is you come to court, it's in a non-traditional setting, it's in the library, and then there's basically sort of like breakout rooms where as you come in, there's tables and rooms with all housing, drug and alcohol services, mental health, whatever, right? From your community organizations are there. And you come to court, it's very informal. There's no judge in a robe. The judge is there, but it's, again, more of an informal setting. You come in, you check in, and then they can plug in with those services while they're there, right? And then they leave. So it's, and then if they continue through that program, you have to, the prosecutor's there, public defender's there, we're all there, sort of having court, but in a very different way while you're providing those services. All of that takes time to build out in your community, right? There's fantastic ideas, and I want us to get there, but that's going to take a lot of time and just resources. But it takes man hours too, right? It's going to take a lot of people, and I think for us, it would, just my office specifically, we'd be, as I think Judge Lev said it, it runs through the prosecutor's office, right? Think of everything as a stream that goes into the court, right? And we're always like branching off to divert things to make that stream of what actually gets to the court for typical court proceedings to be as focused as possible. And so this is a stream where you're diverting things to something else, right? And that diversion process takes effort, takes coordination with the police to identify. And that's what we're doing with LEAD. Part of what we're doing with LEAD is working with law enforcement to say, hey, you know what? I came across this person. This person has some needs and be a great fit for this. And how do so it's cooperation, it's coordination, and working to develop that as a program, as a system. And so that takes time and just takes resources, including money and people. So.
Well, let's.
Councilmember Williams, I've got Anderson, who's been patiently waiting. You've been able to get about 6 or 7 questions in, which I appreciate. It's a good line of discussion. Yeah. It's like you're like an attorneys going back and forth. I just wanted to point out to committee members that it's 4:37. We still have additional items on our agenda, and we have about 30 minutes of executive session. So just let's maybe contain this. I don't think this conversation is over with. So I think that we will have another opportunity to bring up items. Go ahead, Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. Point of clarification. We need to enact a law in order to basically follow a state law. So we can't, if a state law is in place,
Right.
we can't follow that unless we
It's a good
enact a
question.
law
So, yeah, so it's a little
ourselves?
complicated, but yes, so the way it works is that Bellingham Municipal Court only has jurisdiction over crimes that are either spelled out by themselves in the Bellingham Municipal Code or that we've adopted by reference from the RCW, so the state law. That's the only thing that we have. And in fact, every once in a while, I think we brought one in the last few months where we're like, hey, they amended disclosing intimate images. So we had to pass that right because they had amended it. We needed to update our code. Otherwise, we couldn't charge it in Bellingham Municipal Court. So we don't have jurisdiction. Back up a step from that, Whatcom District Court and Superior Court would technically have jurisdiction over anything that occurs, even in the city limits of Bellingham, right? Because they enforce all state laws. The issue there, of course, is more one of, they probably wouldn't take a boatload of Bellingham drug cases, right? I mean, I'd have to talk to Mr. Ritchie about that, but that was initially their concern, was that they're like, we're not taking all of their misdemeanor drug cases. That's a lot. Your council needs to pass it, and you need to come up with a system to deal with it. And we never did that. And again, part of it is because that law sunsetted. When they put it in place, they immediately gave themselves a timeline and said, let's figure out something better. And as you've alluded to, they're trying to figure that out, but that law goes away in July 1st. So they're trying to replace that.
And council, can I make a request? So I'd like to try to be productive. As I mentioned before, our downtown has very valid concerns, and this isn't going to be a quick fix. I would like to request, and if it has to be a motion, I'll do a motion, but in the spirit of collaboration, I would like to request that staff and the mayor work on a timeline for the therapeutic court. Take a look at what is the budget, what are the resources, how fast can we get everybody to the table to really get this in place so that we can have something positive to be able to help with the people with addiction. But on top of that, try to identify and maybe bring back at the next session what additional steps we can take to help our downtown businesses. Because I think it is behavior that I always think of planning. When people are worried about too many people living in one house, it's not the people living in the house, it's the noise, it's the garbage, it's the nuance of those people being too many people in a house. So if we have issues downtown, a lot of it's behavior. It's not just catching somebody at that moment doing drugs. So the behavioral aspect, what resources do we need? Whether it's more cleanup, whether it's being able to have officers on the street, what can we do in a very quick timeline to provide assistance to those downtown businesses that are contacting us who expect today's vote to fix things?
Before you respond, Mayor, committee members, any objections to Councilmember Anderson's proposal? No? Okay, go ahead, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Well, just briefly, as it relates to the comment that Councilmember Stone brought up, and you reiterated, as far as having eyes on the street that might witness somebody using a controlled substance in public, you have to have a witness, a credible witness available to do that. And we've invested in security, we've invested in ambassadors. It's not going to be just that moment when there happens to be a police officer walking down the street who happens to see somebody using a controlled substance. So there's that. As it relates to the request, as I said at the beginning, Judge Lev and I and the administration are going to partner on doing the assessment that's needed to identify what needs need to be obtained in order to bring forward and make happen a therapeutic court. And we're committed to doing that. I'm hearing wide support for that from the council. We'll do that. We'll come back. I can't assure you that the next meeting is the time at which we'll be ready to do that, but I'll certainly give you an update on where we're at in initial planning. This was something that we announced as an idea that we think is valuable. Its time has come. We were sharing that, presenting this idea for consideration today, and I'm hearing support for it. So we will we'll do that, and we'll prioritize that.
Thank you, Mayor. Any further comments? Councilmember Stone.
follow-up, I guess, to Councilmember Anderson's request, but the reference made to RCW sections that we have not adopted by reference, if there, and it doesn't need to be now, but I guess from Chief Mertzig and or the City Attorney's Office to what some of those sections may be, and if there are, I mean, what I hear from Chief Mertzig, if there are truly, right, gaps where then officers are prevented from being able to engage. Part of my concern at this point, right, is that if we don't have those other pieces down the stream set up, then, yeah, I don't know how productive it is, but if there are gaps where there's activity that Councilmember Anderson's referencing, right, the concerns about the activity that maybe surrounds those infractions or abuses that officers currently aren't able to respond to or engage with members of the public about. I'd be curious what those are, just some examples of
Are you
those.
proposing support or inclination to consider support for adopting by reference the state standard?
Right, if,
Because we're proposing that's pretty much what is before you as an ordinance locally.
because this has because it doesn't say, so I saw in the definitions under controlled substance, right, the reference to RCW sections that define controlled substance, but are you saying that this particular use of a controlled substance in a public place is currently listed in a separate RCW?
No, so 6950-4013 is the law that Councilmember Anderson was speaking of earlier, where there's the two references. So it is still illegal to possess drugs. No, now they added the term knowingly, because that was the issue in Blake, right? Is it the felony? But when Olympia decided to update that law after Blake, they added those. Well, let's not make it a felony. Let's make it a misdemeanor. Well, let's not make it a first offense. Let's have those two essential warnings or attempts to plug them into services first. So it was a response directly to it. But instead of just adding knowingly into the current code and making it still a felony, they decided to make it a misdemeanor. My point is, then it became in our jurisdiction, and we just never passed it. It never came forward. So it's never been enforced in the city.
Okay, just follow up. So
It is still technically illegal in the state of Washington to possess.
the possession, but the ordinance that's brought forward by the mayor focuses on use.
Use would be more of a focus of possession. It's kind of a subset of, I mean, if you're using it, you're obviously possessing it, right? So it's more of a focused behavior instead of simple possession. Possession is more of a wider category, which would include use, being in your pocket, being in your backpack, all those sorts of things that we probably have tons of scenarios where people are even like, that sounds icky. Use is obviously much more focused, but it's part of that, right? Like it's not spelled out in the code because, in the RCW, because use is already assumed as part of that because you would be possessing it to use it.
Okay.
So
And so
this
is
is kind
there,
of focusing it where it wouldn't be illegal to simply have it in your pocket. You'd have to be actively using it.
then is there a reason why the mayor and the city attorney drafted this language the way it is, not addressing possession more broadly, but specifically use?
I think we were attempting to be responsive to concerns that were expressed by multiple people downtown around open use on public streets. And we learned that there was another example of a community that had adopted a similar ordinance that is seeing benefits. And so we presented this for your consideration.
Williams, last question.
The law just basically changed the response to it.
Yes, I mean, by adding, they had to fix one thing first, right? Blake was, hey, there needs to be something other than possession. It has to be a mens rea, which is the mind, so there was, okay, we have to add the word knowingly. You have to knowingly possess. And then while they were doing that, they decided, well, do we want to keep the penalty section the same? And Olympia decided, no, we don't. We want to add these, we want to make it a lower crime, and then we want to add these other requirements. And that's exactly
Correct.
why they were
So-
fixing it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, Anderson?
So if State Bill now into the House 5536 passes, it has to be brought to us to pass it in order to be able to enforce it. Correct?
It's a misdemeanor, correct. Yeah, if they make the punishment a misdemeanor, then that, we'll have to bring that
Okay.
back. Yeah.
So,
If that's, yeah.
because
Force it.
looking at use versus possession, understanding state law versus not on our books, I would suggest keeping an eye on it. And if there are any other laws on the books that are prohibiting us of doing public safety that we haven't passed, I'd be curious to know what those are. So we're not at this point trying to figure this out or create something new versus just adopting.
Does administration have clarity on that direction?
To be perfectly honest, I'm not entirely sure I'm tracking the particulars here. I got lost when you made reference to a particular house number, and
So my concern is now finding out, because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an officer, I assumed a state law can be enforced by the community officers. Do we have other state laws that affect community safety that we have not accepted as part of our ordinances here in Bellingham?
I think
Because
that
I mean, I'm surprised that this is not, I'm assuming just misdemeanors, but that we can enforce a state law. It's kind of shocking. So I'm just curious if our officers are aware of other ones. And if so, if that list could be presented or sent to us in an email.
we can certainly do that. I suspect nobody's prepared to respond to that right now.
And
but
I
we
don't
can do
expect
that.
something from the 60s that is out of date.
Right.
And, you know, no moral police kind of.
I can actually answer that. Actually, I do have a list that I keep of crimes that have come up that we don't have not adopted. I actually have an active list, and I'm always like, you know, one day we'll do an ordinance where we adopt these. Just again to remember, on some of the one-offs we've had a couple of bizarre ones where officers have called me and been like, literally like transportation of a corpse, like is an RCW and it's a misdemeanor. But like, we don't have that one on the books. But they can still cite that in a district court. This was a case of volume, right? Like district court was telling us, we're not going to take your drug cases because that's a volume thing. So it isn't, I want to be clear, it's not that we can't enforce them in the city. It's that we don't have jurisdiction in municipal court if they're not adopted into our code. But there are other crimes that I would like to see added to that, and I do have a list. But again, for the drug cases, it's more, that's a volume concern, right? We can maybe give them the one-off where it's a random, case. Hey, we don't have this RCW adopted. Do you guys mind taking it in district court? Yeah, they're totally fine with that. That happens not infrequently. Maybe once every couple months, 3 months. Again, there's very, very crazy random specific crimes in the RCWs. But drugs is one that it's just volume. They were like, you've got to figure it out on your own. We're not going to take all those. So.
Okay, committee members, we are at 4:50. Is there any objection to moving this discussion or continuing this discussion at a further council meeting? Is that all right with everyone? Okay, I'm getting head nods. All right. Chief, Judge, Prosecutor, thank you for being part of this discussion. Mayor, do you feel like you have the direction, or does the administration have the direction?
I certainly perceive support for moving forward with therapeutic court. The question of the ordinance, it appears, is another question. That's up to you, but we're certainly going to take active steps to move on a therapeutic court.
Okay, thank you.
And identification of any additional support
Yes.
for our downtown businesses that we can enact sooner than later. That's the part 2 of it.
Okay, thank you for underscoring that. And just as I indicated in the press release. What's that? Oh, okay, I'm just being urged to suggest that you make that into a motion.
So moved.
I'm going to save my voice and say so moved.
Okay.
Is there a second?
Second?
Okay, motion made by Councilmember Anderson, second by Councilmember Huffman. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions, recusals, motion passes 6-0. Okay, all right, next item. This is Agenda Bill 656. This is a letter in support of LEAD program grant funding. The Whatcom County Health Department has the opportunity to apply for an expansion of grant funding for the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. The grant from the United States Department of Justice will extend the original 3-year grant for an additional 3 years. This funding is critical to continuing the work of LEAD. The Whatcom County Health Department has requested a letter from the City Council in support of this, of the new grant, and apparently I'm presenting this one. Basically, this is a letter to Erica Lautenbach. She's the Health Department Director. This is in support of the LEAD program. Is there anyone that's not familiar on City Council of this program? We all have a basic understanding of what it does. This was funded by Department of Justice funds. For the first several years, those funds were changing, and they are looking for some support because the city does use this program, and it has been successful. They're asking for our support. I'd like to draw your attention to the third full paragraph past your bullet points, mid-page on page 125. From the beginning of the program forward, the number of jail bookings for LEAD clients dropped by 50% or more after participating in the program. And in 2022, jail days for LEAD clients dropped by almost 100%. These are the types of programs that when we're talking about where do people go from a therapeutic court, this is a type of program where people could be successful. So I am going to make the motion to approve the letter that is in our packet. Hold on one second. So I've got another insert here. This is a letter from the mayor's office with the police chief and the city attorney. Are we suggesting that we're supplying 2 letters to Erica Lautenbach? Go ahead, Brian.
Brian Heinrich, Mayor's Office. So the Mayor's Office was also asked to provide a letter of support, and we did so in 2019. I believe legal drafted this as basically an update in support. The conversation that Michael and I had was there value in combining the 2 letters? We can send them separately. I don't know that either of our offices were aware that 2 separate requests were made, so happy to proceed as just 2 separate letters if that makes sense for folks, or we can try and combine them. I think at this point, maybe just sending both would be just fine.
I think in the the interest of time, rather, it just might be easier for us to send our own letter that can accompany the mayor's letter. Mayor, do you have any objection to that?
No.
Okay. Any objections on council? Go ahead, Councilmember Martins.
Not objection, but if this is the draft that's going, there's just, in that paragraph that you read, the second sentence says "they're from the," or "the from the."
Oh, yeah.
So making sure that we just catch that little misspelling before it gets sent off.
Ms. Lassiter, is that something that you can correct? Okay, you've got your direction there? Okay, great. Go ahead, Councilmember Stone.
So, yeah, it was interesting because you read it correctly. It's like
Good.
our mind automatically fixes it. The only other edit in that letter, the last paragraph, first sentence, it just says to this critical initiative, and I was going to change that to program, since it's the LEAD program. Everywhere else it's called the program, and there it's an initiative. I don't know why. Okay. In the mayor's letter, I just noted that Mr. Mariner's name was misspelled. So.
Yes, someone's an editor here. That's great. Thank you for catching those. Ms. Lassiter, are the correction that Councilmember Stone brought up from initiative to program, is that something you can update? Okay. And then it looks like Council President Lilliquist will be the signer on this when he returns from his trip. Okay. So I move that we accept and adopt the letter that's contained in our packet.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made by the chair and seconded by Councilmember Williams. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions, recusals? Seeing none, motion passes 6-0. Our next item is approval of City Council committee and regular meeting minutes from February 27th.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion's been made by Councilmember Williams and seconded by Councilmember Anderson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions, recusals? Seeing none, motion carries 6-0. Old and new business. Councilmember Martins.
Just very quickly, as we have seen how the time really got away from us on a very important discussion, I don't know who to bring this up to, but how do we have a conversation about allotting enough time, at least closer to more than 20 minutes, for more hefty and complicated conversations and discussions?
It's a perennial issue that comes up with council. Are you referring to the ordinance issue? Is that?
The ordinance discussion, and then I think the last time we were talking about ADUs, we had to wrap it up because there wasn't enough time allotted. And so just having this is the only time we're able to get together and have conversations and have the subject matter experts right there on hand. Can maybe schedule a discussion about how long we would need for discussions if we're being realistic in the future?
I'm going to answer to her question, then go to you, Councilmember Anderson. So the allotted time for the ordinance for the controlled substance use in public places was 5 minutes, and that's typically based on the presentation. So that went over. We had multiple presenters, and that's. I mean, I think that if we just made this more and more, just added more time to it. Go ahead.
Can I respond to that?
Go ahead, Mayor.
So the process, of course, is we do the agenda bill. We see what's before council. We try to make an informed assessment as best we can by having some awareness of what topics are probably going to gather more attention and have more discussion. And then it's a decision that's made ultimately, I think, by the council chair. And so today, I guess we should have done a better job predicting what the duration was going to be. So it's never perfect, but we try to take into account, and certainly if some of these items come back again, we'll allot more time, propose allotting more time.
I didn't find out I was chairing the meeting until after the packet was created, so I didn't really have much in the way of input on that one. So
My impression is sometimes it's best to underpredict, because if you say 2 hours and then the next session is at 4 and we finish at 2, we're leaving and coming back because we have to wait to start the next session as predicted by time. So, but 5 minutes definitely wasn't it.
okay. Other items for old and new? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and read the executive session notes here. Executive session, we have our first item is potential property acquisition with stamps, approximately 5 minutes. Second is potential property acquisition with stamps, approximately 5 minutes. Third is potential property acquisition with stamps, approximately 5 minutes. Fourth item is potential litigation, claim 2022-46 with good for 5 minutes. And the fifth item is labor relations, discussion of collective bargaining strategy, Monahan, approximately 10 minutes. Are there any additional items for the executive session coming out of administration or legal? Okay, great. We'll go ahead and adjourn. I will be back at 5:30 if I need to add additional time or to adjourn.